us as part of the nation, as part of the country. We want to build a better Vietnam. We are not against the future, a better future for Vietnam. So we don't think that the government should view us as the enemy, as the opposite side. We are part of the nation. We apologize for the change of program because Father Thang will have to leave here soon. So very quickly, we would like to invite representatives of different faith in Vietnam to come to the stage. And Pastor Ban Chí Minh. Because this year's our theme is religious freedom. Next week will be the ministerial, the advanced religious freedom. So the week before that, we anticipate that. That's why we organize it this way. So the main theme of this year is religious freedom, and then I invite representatives of the different faiths in Vietnam. From the right, we have Pastor Ban Chí Minh from Minnesota. We have here Ifik Doc from Montana. Sorry, Pastor Ban Chí Minh is a Hmong pastor. He has spent 9 years in prison in Vietnam. Ifik Doc is a Montana Christian, very young, and his father was murdered in Vietnam because of his family's Christian faith. And right at the center is Venerable Thích Vịnh Phước, an abbot of 3 Buddhist temples in Vietnam. He flew all the way here from Vietnam, and we're glad that he made it. Did a good job at the airport. And next is Mr. Đỗ Minh Đức from Houston. He represents the Cao Đài Church. And then Father Lê Quốc Thăng, who just made the presentation. So very quickly, each one of them will say a prayer in their own faith, very quickly, and please rise.
In the adherent of Cao Đài Zone, we pray for everyone because we are a human. We should help human community. That is we focus. Thank you.
Lạy Thiên Chúa Ban Ngôi là Thiên Chúa tình yêu. Chúng con cần nại Chúa vì tình yêu, xin tuôn đổ tình yêu trên mỗi tâm hồn chúng con. Cụ thể trên những con người mà chúng ta đang cầu nguyện, những người chịu áp bức bất công, những người tù nhân lương tâm, những người dân thấp cổ kẻ học trên quê hương đất nước chúng con. Xin cho mọi người có được niềm tin vững vàng và tôn trọng của mình để vươn lên trong cuộc sống, xây dựng những giá trị tốt đẹp. Xin cho mọi người tìm được sự nâng đỡ, cổ vũ, đồng hành của mọi người để kiến tạo tình yêu thương hiệp nhất. Và chúng con cầu nguyện cho những nhà lãnh đạo, những nhà cầm quyền trên quê hương đất nước chúng con cứ thay đổi tâm linh, thay đổi quan điểm để trở về với dân tộc, trở về với dân nước, sống xứng đáng là người con của đất nước Việt, để cùng với mọi người xây dựng cái đất nước quê hương Việt Nam chúng con mỗi ngày một tươi sáng tốt đẹp hơn.
địa mà Việt Nam hiện anh chắc của bọn chúng ta bị khắp nên lên chắc ai tia câu cái tia tốt lên 10 cái chỉ trang nạc buôn sang bờ buôn sang đây là tụ căn lại là Nam trang bray một lại nghe lần chỉ trang lúc na tốt lên 10 cái lúc na vậy thì một lần lịch khắp cái buôn sang thời trang cái buôn sang là thọ khắp cái chỉ trang cùng tôi có ta phải thì ngào xem bờ nên lên chắc ai tia
mà chỉ của các cháu từ cái cháu lý sống thao lưu các tàu của bên đã mong Việt Nam mình sẽ có cái chung lúc sau thì các của bên của cho tan sinh用của thế nào các trạng bên sự tiền được bên chủ phụ chỉ bảo bên của cho bên cháu thì cho mình quan trọng bây giờ mong có công ty chờ một rồi sáng gì lúc đi chờ chỉ một bên chỉ một chơi nhau sau này đến nó của lúc đi thời sẽ của tôi công ty chờ chỉ một tông tại bây giờ tôi thành phố quốc gia này trong Việt Nam và chỉ thảo các phòng của một số bên lúc nào cũng tôi cho hắn nó và cũng sẽ chỉ để ban chủ cao lưu sinh là tôi ở thật thà chúng là bên bao cả bên trong thực hiện chữ dọn của bên chúng con hay qua cùng cũng là bên chủ sai bên kỹ năng gì của bên nhóm mong để nhau trong cũng là tên hay cho cái tên cho các bên tinh chơi hay cho tôi này từ bộ tôi vô quốc gia này trong bên chúng là bộ các trong thời gian mà trong một cao sư bên của chúng ta bên trả sát có ban chủ bên tôi chỉ sự có được thảo amen.
Nam mô A Di Đà Phật. Nam mô Bổn Sư Thích Ca Mâu Ni Phật. Nam mô Phật Tổ Phật Thầy Kim Sơn Phật. Nay chúng con thành tâm cầu nguyện cho quốc thế dân an, cho đất nước Việt Nam có được qua cơn pháp nạn, tự do được quyền tín ngưỡng, được cho tự do tôn giáo của mình và đất nước và được bình yên, tất cả mọi người quốc thế dân an. Nam mô Bổn Sư Thích Ca Mâu Ni Phật. Nam mô A Di Đà Phật.
Thank you. Please be seated. And the one who just said prayer is by his brother, older brother, Newton. Many of you might remember died in police custody with his cold cut. And now I'd like to invite the panelists to the stage. And I'd like to invite Andy, also Scott and Gil, and Venerable Thích Dịch Phước, come up here again, and Michelle Nguyen.
Xin chào quý vị, để cho thời gian nó ngắn gọn, tôi xin phép được nói bằng tiếng Anh mà thôi nhé. Xin quý vị vui lòng thông cảm. Good morning. My name is Andy Nguyen from Texas. Welcome to the plenary session of the 2019 Vietnam Advocacy Day. Yesterday, we walked the halls of Congress and met with the legislative representatives of the United States of America, asking them to help share the lights of freedom and the dignity of human rights with our 90 million plus people in Vietnam. This morning, we have the opportunity to learn more about the current situation in Vietnam, the U.S. policy toward Vietnam in respect to human rights, particularly religious freedom, and what we can do to help improve conditions in Vietnam. To begin, we will have a panel on U.S. policy in respect to human rights and religious freedom in Vietnam. And with us are subject matter experts, advocates, and policy decision makers that will share their insights as well as their experience with us, equipping us with the knowledge necessary to be effective and successful in our journey and struggle toward a free and human right respecting Vietnam. With us, we have Mr. Scott Busby, is Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. He is a Vietnam expert with a long track record of working on refugee protection and human rights. Please help me welcome Mr. Scott Lester. Commissioner Gail Manson, she is the Vice Chair of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. She was the First Lady of West Virginia from 2005 to 2010. And she was also the Secretary of the state of West Virginia in terms of education and arts. And she also served as the West Virginia's Board of Education in 2007 to 2015. And she is the wife of a very well-respected, for his independence, United States Senator Joe Manchin. Please help me welcome him. We have with us activist Michelle Nguyen. She may be small, but don't judge her by her size. She has a big heart. She is the co-founder of the Vietnam Coalition Against Torture and a strong advocate for members of the persecuted religious communities in Vietnam. Last but certainly not least, all the way from the homeland of Vietnam, Venerable Thich Vĩnh Phúc. He is the abbot of Phước Bửu Pagoda and Pháp Biên Shrine, as well as Đức Quang Shrine in Bà Rịa, Vũng Tàu, Vietnam. He is a member of the Vietnam Buddhist Sangha and Vietnam Interfaith Council. And here to moderate the panel is someone who needs no introduction, Dr. Han Nguyen.
Actually, we have a fifth panelist, and that is Senator John Cornyn of Texas. He's on his way here. So let us get started first. Yeah. So I would like to ask Scott, a dear friend of mine, to share his experience coming back from Vietnam recently, and also to give some insight about U.S. diplomatic policies to promote human rights, religious freedom, and also democracy in Vietnam.
Thank you, Dr. Tom. And thanks to all of you for being here and for your engagement on human rights in Vietnam. The U.S. government can do some things to try to advance human rights in Vietnam, but it really takes the advocacy and engagement of people like you day in, day out, with your representatives, with representatives of Vietnam, with other members of the diaspora community. Ultimately, it's through those sort of collective efforts that progress can be made. So thank you very much for that engagement. As Dr. Tong said, I was just in Vietnam for the 23rd session of our annual human rights dialogue with Vietnam. Before the actual dialogue, I held meetings in Ho Chi Minh City with members of unregistered religious groups and other activists in that part of Vietnam. And then we flew up to Hanoi, where we held a day of meetings with activists and others before our formal dialogue. We also had high-level meetings with the government before the dialogue. At the end of the dialogue, as I'll describe in more detail, at the last minute, the government of Vietnam gave me permission to visit Ms. Trong Thi Nha, a very prominent political prisoner. So I spent a day actually flying down to the middle of the country, seeing her very briefly, and then flying out. So that was my itinerary in Vietnam. Let me talk now about our overall policy with a particular focus on human rights. As a whole, the U.S. government has continued to build and strengthen our comprehensive partnership with whenever we work together, whether it's on humanitarian issues, legacy of war issues, or our shared goal of a free and open Indo-Pacific, and that means thwarting China's efforts to take over the Indo-Pacific, we prioritize opportunities for growth. Growth of our political, security, economic, and people-to-people ties with Vietnam. This can only happen when we work together with Vietnam as partners on these shared goals. That said, human rights is an area that we have some cooperation on, but we continue to have significant differences on. And at this dialogue, as with previous dialogues, I made the point that our relationship can only go so far until and unless we see further progress on human rights. We had a little cooperation from the government last year on the release of a few prominent political prisoners, the first being Mother Mushroom, who is now thankfully here in the United States with her mother and 2 children. And we also worked closely with the German government in obtaining the release of Nguyen Mai and Lê Thu Ha, both leaders of the Brotherhood for Democracy. So we were pleased with that, the government's willingness to allow those 2 people out of jail. The government, however, as usual, only let them out of jail if they agreed to leave the country. The dissidents in question did agree to leave the country. Not an ideal outcome, but at least it got them out of jail. That said, one of the chief concerns we have about the human rights situation in Vietnam, which I raised during the dialogue, is the increase in the number of prisoners of conscience. We estimate that there are now well over 100 such prisoners. And not only is there an increase in the arrest and prosecution and conviction of such prisoners, but they are increasingly receiving very, very long sentences, sometimes more than a decade.
Đây là cái buổi họp báo
Merely for
ở
expressing
Courage.
their views, practicing their religion, doing things that are completely non-violent and do not pose a threat to the Vietnamese government. For example, Chun Tin Ya is a courageous human rights advocate who, even after being beaten by authorities, continued to stand up for women, prisoners, and victims of trafficking. During the dialogue, I raised his case. As I mentioned, I visited her in Gia Lai province, where she was in prison. I had an hour with her. She demonstrated her activist spirit from the minute we started our meeting. When I asked her how she was doing, she said she launched into the various ways in which she was being mistreated in jail and the ways in which she had been mistreated over the course of her prosecution. We are continuing to press the government to try to get her released from jail, and I hope that we can accomplish that in the near future. We raised a number of other individual cases. Unfortunately, these are not isolated instances. And again, we made the general point to the government, both in the dialogue and in separate meetings, that we demand they release political prisoners as soon as possible and respect the population's fundamental rights to freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of peaceful assembly, and freedom of association. One of the other concerns we raised during the dialogue was the recently passed cybersecurity law, which we feel adds to an inhospitable environment for free expression in the country. It basically expands the government's ability to use vague national security provisions to detain those freely expressing their views online. During the dialogue, we did get the government to agree to receive further comments from ourselves, as well as others, on the regulations implementing this law, and we hope that that will lead to some modest improvement in how that law is implemented. One of the other cases of concern I raised when I was there that occurred recently is that of the Radio Free Asia blogger Chun Nguyen Mới. He was in Thailand, had applied for asylum with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in Thailand, and then suddenly disappeared from Thailand and reappeared inside Vietnam. I asked about how that happened, and the authorities ultimately did concede that there had been cooperation with the government of Thailand, leading to his arrest there and his transfer to Vietnam. That is very concerning to us, as well as many others, and we will continue to raise his case. This group is fundamentally interested in religious freedom, I know, because you have a lot of representatives of different faith communities here for the Religious Freedom Ministerial next week. So let me talk about that issue. First, let me say that we always make the fundamental point with the government of Vietnam that people should not have to register with the government in order to practice their faith. There's no reason that the government needs to regulate this activity in the way that it does. That said, the government has recently adopted a law on freedom of religion and belief. We think that implementation of that law has led to some modest progress in respect for freedom of religion. We are pleased that there's ongoing dialogue between the government of Vietnam and the Catholic Church. There continue to be significant problems in the way the government treats the Catholic Church, but we're pleased that the government is at least willing to have a serious dialogue with the Catholic Church. And as I mentioned, those groups that have registered under the law on belief in religion have seen some modest improvement in respect for their right to practice their faith. That said, we have also noted that outside of the urban areas, the law is basically not being implemented. And I know you have representatives of the Montagnards here, as well as the Hmong. And in particular, we've noted that those groups have not enjoyed any significant progress in respect for their right to freely practice their religion. We also have noted ongoing problems with the unregistered Wahao Buddhists, the Cao Dai followers, among Christians, as I already mentioned, and activist Catholics. So we will continue to press the government to respect the rights of these people. We also raised the issue of labor rights when we were there. Vietnam has recently adopted a new labor law, and we are working with them in trying to adopt implementing regulations that will improve respect for labor rights. Our fundamental concern about the situation of workers in Vietnam is they don't have the right to join any union other than that is affiliated with the Communist Party. That is a fundamental problem. That said, there are modest improvements to labor laws in other respects, and our Labor Department continues to talk closely with their labor experts to try and improve the implementing regulations relating to labor law. Lastly, let me note that next year marks the 25th anniversary of our renewal of diplomatic relations between the United States and Vietnam. And I think it is quite significant. I think we've made a lot of progress since the renewal of diplomatic relations. The overall goal of the U.S. government is to continue to encourage the development of a strong, prosperous, and independent Vietnam that contributes to international security, engages in free, fair, reciprocal trade, but importantly must respect human rights and the rule of law. And I think we've seen a downward trend on those issues in particular, and so those issues are priorities for us in pressing the government of Vietnam as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Gail almost made it to Vietnam. Yes, so you can share your experience about that almost visit to Vietnam. No, I'm kidding. Please share with us the policy and the program and the plan of USERF on how to promote and actually promote religious freedom in Vietnam, and also to defend the rights of the victims of religious persecution. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you very much for, first of all, allowing me to be here today, and also for your kind introduction. My name is Gail Manchin, and I am honored to be a part of this panel today representing the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USERF, all the acronyms that we have out there, where I serve as the first vice chair. But before I begin, I do want to extend USERF's sincere thanks to Dr. Tong of Both People SOS. He and his team do an outstanding job. So on behalf of the commissioners and the staff of USERF, I want to thank them for the outstanding work on behalf of all religious and ethnic communities in Vietnam. We had the pleasure yesterday of speaking with several of the advocates, religious clerics that are here visiting, and that is such an important dialogue. But let me first provide an overview of USERF for those who may not already be familiar with our work. Just over 20 years ago, Congress passed the International Religious Freedom Act, or IRFA, with the goal of making religious freedom a higher priority for the United States in terms of foreign policy. This law created USERF, as well as the State Department's Office of International Religious Freedom. So to be clear, USERF is not a part of the State Department, but we certainly work with the State Department. So why did Congress create a commission dedicated to religious freedom? Congress realized that by promoting religious freedom, the needs to be free from partisanship and politics. To that end, USERF is both independent and bipartisan, which provides us with a unique position from which to monitor and report on violations of freedom of religion abroad. At a time when it seems there is so much that divides us, freedom of religion or belief in an issue that cuts across party lines is vital. I am proud to serve as a part of a unique bipartisan body fighting for this right around the globe. Moreover, USERF focuses exclusively on religious freedom, and we do not feel pressured by U.S. government's overall economic or security or domestic relationship with a country, with a particular government. Each year, we issue an annual report describing religious freedom conditions in countries considered to be among the worst violators of this fundamental right. In it, we also provide clear, actionable policy recommendations that go to the President, to Congress, to the Secretary of State, all about how to advance religious freedom throughout U.S. foreign policy. Under IRFA, the State Department is required to designate countries of particular concern, or CPC countries, with governments that engage in or tolerate systematic, ongoing, and egregious religious freedom abuses. In our report, we recommend to the State Department which countries meet this standard. USERF uses international human rights standards, not United States domestic law, to assess religious freedom conditions around the world. Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, a bedrock of international human rights law, states that everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This language is echoed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In addition, the covenant instructs governments to refrain from coercing individuals in ways that would prevent them from practicing or adopting the religion of their choice. USERV's reliance on these international legal standards is crucial because it makes clear that religious freedom is not simply an American ideal. It is a shared global human right. So what does this mean for Vietnam? First, the Vietnamese government signed and ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights in 1982. In so doing, Vietnam promised the world that it would respect and implement Article 18's protection for religious freedom. That was a very welcome step, but unfortunately, it has proved meaningless in practice. In the 4 decades since, Vietnamese authorities have continued to harass independent religious organizations, imprison religious freedom advocates, and force religious minorities to renounce their faith. For these reasons, in 2004, the State Department designated Vietnam as a country of particular concern. This resulted in a binding agreement between the United States and Vietnamese governments, which could have been an opportunity to provide Vietnam with a roadmap to improve its record on religious freedom over the long term. Indeed, at the time, USERV noted that some progress was being made. Unfortunately, in 2006, the State Department removed Vietnam from the CPC list to acknowledge the Vietnamese government's efforts. Despite what seemed to be a diplomatic victory for both Vietnam and the United States, religious freedom conditions in Vietnam deteriorated almost as soon as the CPC designation was lifted. As many of you in this audience know all too well, the situation in Vietnam has only gotten worse since then. Under the Law on Belief and Religion, which went into effect on January 1st, 2018, Catholics, Hmong, and Montagnard Christians, Wat House Buddhists, Cao Dai followers, Kumar Klong Buddhists, and other religious groups have experienced increased restrictions on their ability to practice their faith. We also cannot forget about Thien Nguyen Do, patriarch of the United Buddhist Church of Vietnam. Last year, my fellow commissioner and colleague, Christina Arriaga, adopted Thien Nguyen Do as part of USERV's Religious Prisoners of Conscience project. And while he is no longer under effective house arrest, USERV remains very concerned about his current conditions and overall well-being. We urge the Vietnamese government to leave him in peace. The Vietnamese government might believe that it can prevent the truth about religious freedom conditions from reaching the international community. Unsurprisingly, it has failed, thanks in large part to the fantastic work of our friends at Boat People SOS and other Vietnamese human rights groups. We at USERV use your information to shine a light on the abuses and hold perpetrators responsible and accountable. We're also fortunate to have the support of so many members of Congress who follow the situation in Vietnam very closely. So what can we do? Fortunately, the United States government has more tools at its disposal than ever before to promote religious freedom abroad. First, for the reasons I have discussed earlier, the State Department should redesignate Vietnam as a country of particular concern. This will send a clear signal to Vietnam that we are watching its religious freedom record closely. This designation is also important because if the State Department designates the country as a CPC, then under IRFA, the United States government is legally obligated to carry out concrete policy action. Second, the United States government must use every tool at its disposal to target specific Vietnamese officials and agencies that have participated in or who are responsible for the severe violations of religious freedom. This includes possible use of targeted sanctions under the Global Magnitsky Act and IRFA. Finally, the U.S. Agency for International Development and other development agencies should incorporate religious freedom into every capacity-building program for local governments and civil society organizations in Vietnam. It is important to ensure that all stakeholders appreciate the importance of religious freedom and understand their rights and their obligations under international law. In conclusion, I would like to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for being here today in our country and for making your voices heard. It is because of the spirit and the energy of people like you that I am ultimately hopeful about the future of religious freedom in Vietnam. You, sir, stand ready as a member of this team with each of you, ready to work toward a better outcome for all Vietnamese. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Manchin. And now we have Senator John Cornyn here. We all know Senator John Cornyn. He has been the author of the draft law on Vietnam Human Rights Sanctions Act for many times already. So again, Senator Cornyn, a very good friend of Vietnamese American advocates for human rights and democracy in Vietnam.
Good morning. It's good to see all of you, and thank you for letting me drop by. I know that this you had the panel going, and Ms. Manchin was saying some very important things, but I wanted to stop by and just offer a few words and primarily of encouragement. But of course, it's an honor to be with you, as it always is when you come to Washington, D.C. Reflect on our shared fight, promote democratic values, and encourage human rights and religious freedom to be respected in Vietnam. It's a great privilege to serve people of Vietnamese origin. I was mentioning to somebody that I love to ask people, what do you think the third most commonly spoken language in Texas is? And they're always shocked when I say it's Vietnamese. But it's true. It's true. And I have to say, as I have a chance to visit with my constituents who are Vietnamese Americans, they're always hardest working, most accomplished, best educated, and huge contributors to our economy and our state, and I'm grateful for that. Your culture, of course, is woven into the very fabric of our country and reminds us of the obligations that we hold to each other. I want to thank all of you, and particularly the panel, for their steadfast advocacy for democracy, human rights, and religious freedom in Vietnam, a place where those values are not the norm, or at least not yet. Unfortunately, the human rights climate in Vietnam has continued to decline. The government limits political freedom by denying citizens their right to vote in a fair election, their freedom of assembly and expression, and their right to due process of law. This year, Vietnam was ranked 176th out of 180 countries in the World Press Freedom Index by Reporters Without Borders, one of the ways we measure the status of human rights around the world. This illustrates just how suppressed the voices of many in Vietnam have become. A particular concern are the laws that use the internet under the guise of cybersecurity, which went into effect at the start of this year. These provisions have the power to limit the free exchange of ideas, stunt development in Vietnam's digital economy, and require businesses to give the government private information. Less than 10 days after the law went into effect, the social media networking site has already been accused of allowing users to post anti-government views. We all know that's not promoting cybersecurity. That's stifling free speech. Religious freedom, as you know, is also threatened. Vietnam's law on belief and religion requires religious organizations to seek approval for routine religious activities. It's also outlawed otherwise peaceful groups who do not register with the government. Local authorities have seized the property from houses of worship like Catholic churches and Buddhist temples and have harassed or persecuted members of religious minorities. This legislation is flawed at its core and is inconsistent with international covenants. It restricts religious freedom rather than protecting it. This year, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom has again recommended designating Vietnam as a CPC, or country of particular concern, something they've advocated since 2002. They are correct to do so. As of the start of this year, more than 240 prisoners of conscience are languishing in Vietnamese jails. In the face of these monumental challenges, the fight for Vietnamese human rights is a worthy one. Rising interest in socialism and other failed forms of government by those who have not experienced their shortcomings firsthand, we need to work to bolster democracies around the world. Strengthening one democracy will help strengthen them all. In May, I reintroduced the Vietnam Human Rights Sanctions Act to try to help to do just that. This legislation would impose travel restrictions and other sanctions on Vietnamese nationals complicit in human rights abuses against their fellow citizens. These sanctions would not be lifted until the Vietnamese government releases all political prisoners and stops the use of violence against peaceful demonstrators. As much as we're working to deepen our bilateral ties, the reality is that the success of the U.S.-Vietnam relationship demands that Vietnam's human rights record improve. There's certainly been ups and downs in recent months. I was encouraged by the President and Secretary Pompeo's visit to Vietnam in February, and I'll continue to urge them to prioritize the cause of human rights in Vietnam. Another bright spot in this fight is the story of Houston native Nguyen, who returned to Texas after being held prisoner in Vietnam and spending more than a month in detention. As Will said at the airport upon returning home, freedom is something even more precious than I envisioned. It's hard to put into words. But these signs of progress remain coupled with brutal reminders of the harsh conditions that remain. Just a few weeks ago, a court in Vietnam sentenced Michael Nguyen, a U.S. citizen, to 12 years in prison for attempting to overthrow the state. Despite these setbacks, we remain steadfast in our advocacy to improve human rights, protect individual liberty, and promote Vietnamese freedom. I want to thank you for your support and for courageously supporting these causes. This meeting and this movement are vital to the fight for human rights in Vietnam and around the world. And I remain hopeful that by working together, the future of Vietnam will be one that is for a fair and free Vietnam, dedicated to democratic values. So thank you for letting me come by and share a few words with you. Thank you for being here in Washington for this worthy cause. And and I appreciate being able to have a few moments of your time. Thank you, God.
Thank you. And now I'd like to invite Michelle Nguyen.
Hello everyone. It is my honor to be here today and allow the opportunity to be on this panel with our distinguished guests. You have heard from members of Congress, from policymakers, from independent experts, religious leaders, and you have heard a lot about the law on belief and religions. That makes my piece real easy. I don't have a lot to say. I'm only here to share a few examples and some photos. There was saying, a picture worth 1,000 words. To recap what the excellent remark that Father Tang just gave earlier, in 2016, the National Assembly of Vietnam passed the Law on Belief and Religion, which took effect on January 1st, 2018. Religious freedom experts, religious leaders, independent religious groups are concerned that the law is used as a new tool for the government to control strictly religious activities. The law has some vague articles that have many concerns that they could be exploited. For example, the law requires that all faith groups have to register with the government and inform them of all religious activities that organize at religious establishments. And the authority have absolute power to approve or reject. So the important question here is, what exactly are considered religious establishments? Article 2 of the law has a very restrictive definition of that. It says a religious establishment is a place to carry out religious activities of community, such as communal houses, temples, shrines, ancestral halls, and similar establishments. That's it. So in conjunction with Article 12 on registration of religious activities, which requires that all religious activities have to be held at religious establishments. So these clauses together, putting members of independent religious communities at risk of violating the law if they hold religious activities at any place that are not considered religious establishments. An example is the case of Hoa Buddhist Nguyen Mới. He's the head of household whose 5 members are sentenced to a total of 24 years in prison and 2 years suspended sentence because he refused to dissolve the prayer hall that he established at his home in An Giang province. That's a picture of Mr. Chung prayer hall, as you can see. It's a very simple, behind the tree and the shrub, that's the prayer hall that he set up. That's the place where the local Hoa Buddhists gather to pray, to study scriptures, or hold traditional ceremonies. In June 2017, during the commemorations of the death anniversary of his mother that he held at his home, 4 family members and 2 Hoa Buddhist guests were arrested and charged with causing public disorder and resisting officials performing their public duty. On February 9, 2018, in a one-day trial, they were sentenced to 22 years in prison and 2 years suspended sentence. That's not the single case. We have several more examples. Another one is the case of, those are the pictures of the 6 victims. Their sentence ranged from 2 years to 6 years, and Mr. Chung's wife, because of her health, she got 2 years sentence but a suspended sentence. Another example is Linh Trì Temple in District 2 of Saigon that many of us have heard about, which used to be a place that provides shelter and assistance to victims of illegal land grabs and discriminate veterans of the former South of Vietnam. You can see on the left was temples before, and on the right, a photo of Venerable Thích Không Tánh on the ruin of what was left of Linh Trì Temple when it was demolished in 2016. On the contrary, activities organized by government-sponsored religious organizations enjoy protection and promotion by the government. The Government Committee for Religious Affairs usually promotes these events, and government officials often preside over these activities, and sometimes members of diplomatic missions may be invited so that the Vietnamese government can prove to the world that they have committed to religious freedom. As you can see in the pictures, Mr. Tran Thanh Man, he's a very important man. He's the chairman of the Fatherland Front. He attended and was the keynote speaker at the 80th anniversary of the Hoa Hảo Day of Initiation, a very big celebration ceremony, important ceremony for Hoa Hảo, which was organized by the Central Administrative Council created by the government. And in the lower photo, you can see that the government creates council was sitting in the center, and on either side are government officials. Again, in May 2019, the Buddhist Vesak Festival was organized at several locations in the country by government-created organizations in a splendid manner. And again, several officials from the government attended. Similarly, independent Cao Dai adherents suffer fierce persecution, while the government-sponsored Cao Dai 1997 enjoy protection and promotions by the authorities. In the photo on the left, you can see that the deputy head of the Government Committee on Religious Affairs present flowers to congratulate the government-created Cao Dai Representative Conference for the 2017 and 2022 term. Whereas on the right-hand side, you can see that a dignitary from the 1997 sect blatantly disrupt and flip the table at the funeral organized at the house of an independent Cao Dai adherents. In the pictures, you can see that the government official offered the flower to congratulate the Cao Dai 1997 sect, but on the right-hand side are the independent Cao Dai adherents that get banned from their temple. They have their Saigon temple confiscated by the 1997 in 1997. And for 8 years, the adherents have to prostrate on the streets outside of their temple because they're not allowed to enter their own temples. So that's another example of the disparities in the treatment between the state-sponsored, the registered, and the unrecognized organization. Another example is Din Quán Temple also was demolished. It was confiscated by government force led by uniformed police. So it's not only just the 1997 sect, but we obviously see that the government sent uniformed police to confiscate and demolish the temple. On the other hand, new temples are allowed to be built for the 1997 sect. As you can see, Mr. Nguyen Thanh Tam, he's the leader of the 1997 sect, attend the initiation ceremony on the construction of the new temple. While Article 7 of Chapter 2 stipulates the right to publish scriptures and religious publication, in reality, government censorship is enforced, and only versions approved by the government are allowed in circulations. That is a violation of the right to manifest one's religion through teaching. An example is copies of the collection called Preaching Through Poetry by Prophet Nguyen which consider the sacred scripture of Hoa Hảo, were confiscated and banned from circulation. Anyone who get caught secretly keep or disseminate these materials may be arrested and imprisoned. The government instead published 2 volumes, but they redact several sections that consider sensitive to the government. On the left, you can see the new version published in 2 volumes, and they print in smaller size, and they add some more documents, so in an attempt to disguise the reduction in content and volumes. And on the right side is the original volume, a few that left in that the adherents can keep. The stencil versions only include writing by Prophet Nguyen from 1939 to 1942. All the writing by him from 43 to 47 were considered sensitive and was omitted. So just some short example that show the disparity. We have heard a lot about the law and how it's become the tool. So I would like to call on policymakers, independents, experts, members of Congress, continue to call on the Vietnamese government to amend the law on belief and religion and abolish the requirements of registration and approval of religious organizations. They need to equally protect freedom of belief and religion for all Vietnamese citizens of all faiths or without any faith. Immediately cease the harassment, persecution, and imprisonment of independent religious organizations and their members. Thank you.
Thank you, I would like to ask Honorable here speaking Vietnamese, and I'm trying to make that translate.
Cho tôi là Kích Việt Phước, thuộc Thắng đoàn Giáo hội Phật giáo Việt Nam Thống nhất và là thành viên của Hội đồng Liên tôn. Kính gửi lời đến quý vị đang đại diện ở tại phòng họp này. Trước tiên tôi xin gửi lời cảm ơn chính phủ Hoa Kỳ, Bộ Ngoại giao và Ủy ban tự do tôn giáo quốc tế Hoa Kỳ đã đối thoại với chính phủ Việt Nam, cho nên hôm nay tôi có mặt tại phòng họp này.
I am Venerable Thích Vĩnh Phước, coming from Vietnam. I would like to say hello to all and say thank you to the U.S. government, particularly the USAF and the Secretary of State on our behalf talk to Vietnam about religious freedom.
Thông qua tổ chức BSOS của tiến sĩ Nguyễn Đình Thắng, cho nên đã báo cáo lên phủ Hoa Kỳ cũng như quốc tế để tôi là một người nằm trong một tổ chức Phật giáo độc lập ở tại Việt Nam được có mặt ở đây. Xin cảm ơn tiến sĩ Nguyễn Đình Thắng.
Dear the PPOS, thank you, Dr. Thang Nguyen, that enabled me to be here to share the situation in Vietnam about religious freedom.
Tôi hôm nay có mặt ở đây không biết Phước hay là Hòa, bởi vì cùng những người tôi, những vị lãnh đạo của tôi cũng vì đấu tranh cho cái tổ chức của một tôn giáo độc lập. Những vị lãnh đạo mà tôi từ ngày tôi bước chân vào chùa tu hành đã bị năm 1984 như Hòa thượng Thích Cử Sĩ, Hòa thượng giáo sư tiến sĩ Kỳ Siêu Lê Mật Tháp và những vị lãnh đạo của Giáo hội Phật giáo Việt Nam thống nhất đã bị bắt bớ, giam cầm, tù đày, và như hai vị lãnh đạo tối cao của Phật giáo Việt Nam là Hòa thượng Thích Tuệ Sĩ và giáo sư Lê Mật Tháp đã bị tuyên án tử hình, sau đó xuống trung thân, và cái sự đấu tranh của người Việt hải ngoại cũng như những cơ quan quốc tế đã đối với chính phủ Việt Nam cho nên được thả tự do.
I'm not sure if this is a luck or misfortune that I'm here today. People before me, like the great Venerable Thích Tuệ Sĩ and Thích Chi Siêu and others, were speaking up for the freedom of religion, and they were severely punished. They were sentenced to death, but later on they were able to escape the death. So I'm not sure about my fate here.
Ở Việt Nam hiện nay có hai hệ thống tôn giáo song hành, đó là hệ thống tôn giáo phục vụ Đảng Cộng sản và nhà nước, và hệ thống tôn giáo độc lập không thuộc nhà nước quản lý.